Alright, I guess it's time to pick a covenant. Okay, so all jokes aside, I've been putting this off literally as long as possible. We have to figure out what covenant that we want to pick as a Shadow Priest. Shadowlands is coming out, depending on when this video goes up, it's either coming out tomorrow or today. So, and with that, you have to pick a covenant. I think unfortunately, I wish we didn't have to go down this route. We do have player power tied to a covenant, right? So this decision has weight behind it, right? And I think that could be a good thing. Unfortunately, it's worked out kind of weird, and it's honestly just a little stressful. So in this video, I want to do a couple of things. I want to give you a great overview of which covenants do what, the benefits you get both from DPS and non-DPS perspectives, and hopefully help you make your covenant choice. And at the end is just kind of an Easter egg. I will tell you what covenant I will be picking, at least at the launch of the expansion. You can switch your covenant at a later date. That part's relatively easy, actually. The hard part comes in if you want to, say, go from Necrolord to Night Fae and then back to Necrolord later. That's going to be a bit more challenging to do depending on what the game has done. So let's start off with all the covenants and go over all this stuff and help you make that choice. Okay, so let's start off with the Kyrian. So this is the one that's actually received maybe the least amount of attention out of all of them. They've recently done some reworking with them as far as soulbinds are concerned, which we'll talk about in a second. But at the get-go, this one's looking pretty solid. And I should say before I really get into things, your covenant choice actually really doesn't matter that much. Generally speaking, they're all so close together that in the grand scheme of things, you will be fine. If you really want to pick Venthyr, if you really want to pick Night Fae, or whatever it is, you will do great DPS, I promise you. There are things that impact your DPS way, way more than the covenant choice right now. And at the end of the day, you're talking about like 1 or 2% difference between this choice in the various types of content, right? Now, just like Kyrian, the one we're about to talk about, this is not like a raid covenant. It's not necessarily a dungeon covenant. Each covenant has strengths and weaknesses in all forms of the environment, right? So there is not going to be a correct choice here. You're going to have to sacrifice some things. Okay, so with that interlude out of the way, let's actually get into Kyrian. So, Kyrian, you get 2 abilities like everything else. The kind of signature ability you get for that covenant, this is what every Kyrian gets, regardless if you're a priest, is called Summon Steward. Effectively, you get a health pot, right? So this is a refillable health pot that has 3 charges, I believe. And you can get this 3 charges every 5 minutes, right? So you can save a bit of money. You don't have to worry about crafting your own health potions. That part's nice. The really only utility from this specifically is that using the potion, yes, it restores health. It also can cure most, curses, disease, poison, and bleed effects. There are some things that are immune to that, but, in generally speaking, it will clear debuffs off of your character. And you can also further augment this with soulbinds, right? So the cleanse part of this is pretty useful. Obviously as a priest, we already have a cleanse disease, but because of how often you're going to see bleeds in Castle Nathria or various poisons or curses inside of the dungeon, it's actually pretty useful, although quite boring if I'm being honest. Yes, the Alkin's pretty cool, but what it's actually doing is kind of meh. Doesn't really help our movement either. So there's that. I mean, it's a fine ability for sure. And then the priest-specific ability is called Boon of the Ascended. By far, without a doubt, this is my least favorite. I actually don't understand why this exists for a Shadow Priest. It makes 0 sense to me, and I don't think it's fun to press at all. But there's my rant. So you draw upon the power of the Ascended for 10 seconds, 3-minute cooldown, and gives you access to Ascended Nova, and then replaces Mind Flay and gives you Ascended Blast instead. This is a lot of things happening here. It's a very complex ability. Effectively what this is, it's that 3-minute cooldown. It's got a cast time to go into it. Once you're in it, you have 10 seconds. You can use Ascended Nova and Ascended Blast. With the way the current tuning works out, for the most part, you do not use Ascended Nova on single target, which is quite good because it is an AoE radius around your character that's 8 yards. So you do have to be in melee to get that benefit anyway. And currently, the way tuning sits, using that in single target usually doesn't make sense, depending on if you're using that in or outside of Void form. At the moment, it's a pretty solid increase. This is one of our best single target covenants to use Boon of the Ascended right after you get into Void form, and then use Ascended Blast effectively like every other cast, more or less. And Ascended Blast just does a ton of damage right now. And then at the end of all this, by using Ascended Blast and Ascended Nova, you generate stacks of Boon of the Ascended. And so at the end of that 10 seconds, you then explode for an Ascended Eruption to all enemies around you. And that's a 15-yard radius there. So again, very complex. It's awkward to use. I dislike using it. It's not much fun for me personally. Although again, it does do fairly competitive damage if that's something you're worried about. So there's that. Now to wrap up the Kyrian, this is something I want to bring up because this is very, very important. Most of the power of a Covenant actually doesn't come from these abilities. It comes from the Soul Binds instead. So the Soul Binds are basically mini talent trees that you get to choose from. This is actually what you're slotting in your conduits from. And again, symbols for all this are in the description. For the most part, Kyrian only really have a single Soul Bind that's worth talking about, which is Pelagos. Now, Pelagos was recently nerfed. They actually removed one of his traits from being a damage trait and then it made it be a damage reduction trait, which is, good, just arguably not for DPS, right? It's a great Soulbind. It's pretty much going to be your go-to for all scenarios. Now, there is the third Soulbind, which is Mechanicos. He has a specific trait, I think it's called Hammer of Genesis. It looks to be very, very strong inside of Mythic Plus, but you're not going to get that trait until like 2 or 3 months away from the expansion launch. Could very well change between now and then. But, you really just have a single Soulbind that's worth talking about. Clea virtually has no use cases for Shadow Priest, as far as I'm concerned, so there's that. So overall, that's the Kyrian Covenant. Again, this is probably my least favorite personally, but it does a lot of good damage if you're concerned about that. And it has okay Soulbinds. It has one really good Soulbind. That's about it. Okay, so let's move on to Necrolord. So Necrolord's actually received quite a lot of attention somewhat recently. That's actually bumped it up in a lot of people's mind. If I had to guess, this is probably what a lot of people are going to choose. Now, I don't want to spend the next couple minutes convincing you not to, but I want to make sure you guys know what you're getting into here. So first things first, with Necrolord, you get an ability called Fleshcraft. So Fleshcraft is effectively a shield or defensive Covenant signature ability, one of the few actually. It's a channeled shield that, based on how many targets that you absorb, the shield gets bigger, right? So if you have 5 corpses around you when you use it, you absorb part of them and the shield actually gets bigger. So in terms of utility, on like a Mythic Plus perspective, this shield can get pretty beefy pretty easily. However, in raiding, you're almost never going to be able to use this on a corpse because if you kill an ad inside of a boss fight, 1, you're probably not going to sit and channel it in the middle of a fight, and then 2, usually those corpses don't even count for this, so it's a little weird. So in raiding, it's pretty much just like a pre-pull shield or like an in-between phase kind of a shield, but that's really it. So you're almost never going to see a lot of use for this inside of raiding. Now, dungeons, on the other hand, this ability is actually pretty good and I think very useful. And there's even a Soulbind, which, pending some tuning, looks very, very strong. And so what it does is, based on the type of mob that you absorb, you get a 2-minute buff that ranges from like increased levels of mastery, increased intellect, increased move speed. There's like, 12 or so different buffs depending on the mob type. And that part's actually pretty neat. It's good to make that Soulbind actually somewhat worthwhile. Otherwise, it's probably not going to get used at all. So overall, Fleshcraft pretty decent. Interesting defensive. Its use in raiding is pretty minimal though, so there is that. So if you really care about raiding, not going to be the most useful there. And now the other thing, this is the big one that got reworked recently, is Unholy Nova. So Unholy Nova is a range casted ability, so you effectively target an ally or an enemy and lodge this Unholy Nova at them, effectively like a green bomb of death. And when it hits your target, it radiates out and explodes for instant healing to allies within 15 yards of that. And then enemies within 15 yards of wherever it actually lands. And this is important. It lands specifically where your target was when you casted it. It does have a travel time. So if you're using it on a moving target, it will be a little awkward to aim. It will then explode and apply a 15-second dot to any enemies around the area. And then the other part of that dot is when allies damage that an enemy with a dot, they do get some healing back from that. So it has a lot of different components similar to the Kyrian one. Definitely not as complex though. Now the thing you want to keep in mind here, and this is something that gets very overlooked because, in general the ability sims very well because frankly we just tuned the sim to work very well as optimal as we really could. The dot does scale with haste, which is great. It also gets affected by our mastery. But the thing you got to be careful of, the dot has square root scaling attached to it. This is a very new thing. They've basically added this on like almost every spell in the game, especially for melee. We don't have a whole lot of it as a Shadow Priest. But what square root scaling does, also I should have mentioned, Ascended Nova and Ascended Eruption also have this, but those aren't the big parts of that spell. The square root scaling, what it does is effectively, as you're increasing targets, you do less damage of the spell per target. Right, so Unholy Nova, let's just say if you're fighting one target and it's ticking for like 500 damage a tick on that one target, Well, when you go to 2 targets, instead of it ticking for 500 damage on both targets, it ticks for like 350 for each target, right? You know, which you add it up, it's doing 700 damage total across all targets, which is still, like, adding targets is still more damage. It's just not exactly the same tick rate as you scale targets. So this is really, really important. That actually snapshots. So what that means specifically is if you cast Unholy Nova on 3 targets, and it ticks as if there are 3 targets, everything's fine. If 2 of the targets die, the one that is left is still ticking as if there's still 3 targets out. And this is very, very awkward. And in fact, this even works if you accidentally hit a critter with the spell initially. Since it's not dynamically updating that target list, it actually becomes very, very awkward to use and perhaps inefficient to use because the damage is not exactly where you want it to be. So you need to be very, very careful about using this to make sure that when you're casting it, the mobs that you're casting on, hopefully, as many of them as possible are living for the full 15 seconds. Otherwise, you could have lost damage by just, delaying an extra second or two. And this is the big thing, right? That could get fixed. It's been that way since the rework, but we'll see what happens. It's just very important to keep that in mind because it substantially changes how you use it. Now, the other problem with the way that it's square root scales is that, that means if you're on the perfect example of this is on Blood Council, which is a fight in Castle Nathria. You're fighting 3 bosses. Once you kill one boss, the other 2 reset their health pool. So effectively hitting them is mostly padding. Well, if you're using Unholy Nova, if for whatever reason, boss positioning aside, your Unholy Nova hits all 3, well, you're not getting the priority target damage on the one target you wanted to hit here. It's ticking as if it was ticking on all 3 for equal damage. So the fact that it's not priority target does give this a bit of nuance to how to use it, so keep that in mind. Now, as we move on to Necrolord Soulbinds, it has a very, very solid strength in terms of Soulbinds. It's one of the best that you can see in the game. Amini is going to be a great default for almost everything. The lead by example trait there is fantastic. Great for Mythic Plus, great for rating, great for basically everything. Now, we already mentioned your first Soulbind, I believe it's Plague Divisor Marleth, has that the trait that absorbs Fleshcraft to give you special buffs. That one can be okay, Mythic Plus. That's pretty much the only use case there. And the final Soulbind, which again, you unlock this guy months in advance, which is Bonesmith Hiremere or something. Very competitive Soulbind, if not the best Soulbind in the game. It probably needs to get nerfed. It's a little overpowered. I say a little. I do mean a little. Like, it just needs, I don't know, take off 20, 10%, something like that. So in terms of Soulbinds, great Soulbinds. Overall, very, very solid. Even provides you some solid benefit to your allies with Amini. So in terms of Soulbinds, it looks pretty great. So it's overall, again, another great Covenant choice. Okay, so moving on to Night Fae now. Actually, before I do that, I need to drink a beer. I'm very stressed out. There we go. I feel like I've been living in these covenants, so forgive the, the informality of this video, but here we go. Okay, so the Night Fae Covenant. They've changed this fella so many times, it's hard to keep up these days, but I just did a video. They reworked the main Night Fae ability for Priest, Fae Guardians, and basically with that rework, this has turned into another competitive Soulbind, depending on how you want to play. It is a bit more finicky of like where it gets its benefit from, but very, very solid. So right off the bat, let's talk about my favorite part about the Night Fae Covenant, which is Soul Shape, the Covenant signature ability. So Soul Shape is effectively a blink. It's got a 1.5-minute cooldown. It blinks you forward 15 yards and then increases your movement speed by 50%. And then you can actually recast that blink a few more times for that full duration of 12 seconds. Now, gotta be careful here because if you cast most spells, you do get converted out of that form. So it only lasts as long as you aren't casting spells, but still incredibly useful, especially considering as a Shadow Priest, we don't have a whole lot of movement abilities outside of Dispersion, which shouldn't be used for movement, and then Body and Soul. It's basically all we have. So this really shapes up a large gap that we have in our toolkit as a Shadow Priest. Easily my favorite of the signature abilities, definitely the most useful in my case, in my opinion, rather. So there is that. And then moving on to the big reworked ability, which is Fae Guardians. So Fae Guardians, again, they love giving us these complex abilities. Nothing simple about it these days. So Fae Guardians is a 1.5-minute cooldown, and it gives you 3 fairies. So 2 of the fairies are automatically activated. You don't have to worry about anything. The third one's a little bit weird. So let's go one by one real quick. So the ability lasts for 20 seconds, which means whatever you get here, you get for 20 seconds. So the Wrathful Fairy is up first, which immediately puts the Wrathful Fairy on your current target. if you want to move this fairy around, you can cast Shadowward Pain on a different target. And what that does is it marks that target and says, direct attacks against this target, restore 3 insanity. And that's what it does. Right now, it is technically also working for allies that hit that target, do give you that 3 insanity, although it does have an internal cooldown, so it's not just spamming you with insanity. Honestly, this is very, like, hardly noticeable at all. Like, over, like, a 5-minute period, you're going to get, like, 2 to 4 Devouring Plagues out of this. It's not going to be super substantial. It's something. It's just, you know, nothing to cry home about. You also get a Guardian Fairy automatically cast on yourself, which reduces damage taken by 10%. And again, you can put this on another ally if you'd like by casting Power Word Shield on them to move the fairy. Passive 10% DR, it's fine. And then the third one, this is where the big damage comes in, Benevolent Fairy. Increases the cooldown recovery rate of a major ability by 100%, and it follows your Shadowmen. So this is CDR. This is effectively, it's kind of a unique thing, and it works for most things that were affected by Vision of Perfection in BFA for that essence. They did change it, however, for Shadow, so this actually works for Void Form. So while you have this active and it gets a 20-second buff, instead of Void Form's cooldown, which is Void Eruption, cooling off 1 second per second, it cools down 2 seconds per second. So what this effectively means is, while you use this, if you use it correctly, you're getting about a 20-second reduction in Void Form's cooldown. So it becomes a minute and 10-second cooldown. Now, at the start of things, it's not the best thing in the world. I wish it was a minute because then it would line up cleaner with Power Infusion. That's okay. It's not that big of a deal. So effectively, what this is giving you is more Void Form uptime, right? You're going to, depending on the fights, you could get more, a lot more, or just a little bit. So this is the really tricky part about simming this ability, and that it's a bit of a bait in that depending on when the fight's ending, you could be getting no value or a lot of value out of this, just depending on the fight timings, right? So keep that in mind. It does have some interesting syncing. Mainly speaking, I think it's your second Power Infusion cast. You do want to delay by about 10 seconds to make sure it lines up with this, with your Void Form rather, so keep that in mind. Otherwise, generally this is actually a very solid Covenant. The one thing that's really dogging, Night Fae more than anything is the Soulbinds, actually. The Soulbinds just aren't anything to write home about. Early on, Dreamweaver is actually looking pretty strong. Nia looks pretty solid as well. But outside of that, they really don't have a whole lot of traits that are really that strong. I would say Kyrian, which is their third Soulbind, looks to be pretty solid in Mythic Plus. But again, that's assuming a lot of things about, how long the mobs are living and that kind of thing. So Kyrian is probably over-simming a little bit as far as that's concerned. And, the Soulbinds are fine. I think of the 4, not my favorite. They're probably on par with Kyrian in a lot of places, but, that there it is. I mean, it's going to be okay. It's going to be probably better for early rating more than anything. Second tier of rating is going to be a little dicey if you compare it, but it should still be very competitive throughout Castle Nathria without a doubt. Okay, so we have one Covenant left to go. How long have I been talking for? 16 minutes. Holy crap. Okay, let's move this along. Thanks for sticking with us if you're still watching. So, the Venthyr Covenant. Why should you choose Venthyr? So, with Venthyr, you get, again, 2 abilities. Door of Shadows is the Covenant signature ability. Now, Door of Shadows it was a lot of hype early on. It's basically a teleport. You can, teleport to a specific area on the ground. It is casted, though. It has a 1-minute recharge right now, 1.5 second cast. You can move up to 35 yards. It's not really saving you that much time because it does have a cast time, but it can be helpful. I mean, I find it neat in Torghast for skipping mobs, or sometimes it works in Mythic Plus, not very often. The use cases are very small. I didn't use this at all during raid testing. On Artificer Zymox, it was kind of interesting to game it, but again, it's not that useful. But it's there if you need it, and there are a lot of fun things that augment it that could make it really, really strong, especially in PvP, if that's what you like. Now, moving on to Mind Games. This is probably the simplest Covenant ability in terms of how to use it. It is effectively a single target nuke. That's all it is. It only hits one target. Now, what it does is it applies a debuff on the target after it hits it, saying to absorb some amount of healing and some amount of damage that target deals. I think right now with eye level 200 gear, that shield is around 7,000 or something. So basically, the next 7,000 damage they deal instead heals their target. And if they're trying to heal an ally, instead that would actually damage an ally instead for up to that shield amount. Now, and then if that shield breaks, you get 10 insanity, so you effectively have 2 shields. So you can get upwards of 20 insanity, or just 10 if one of the shield breaks, or 0 if none of them break. For the most part, in a raiding environment, there's really nothing to game here. It's only 7,000 damage. It's nothing that crazy. Now, the 10 insanity is almost always guaranteed in a raiding environment. Although be careful, the debuff does not last that long. You can sometimes not get the insanity, which is feels bad, but again, that's okay. Not that big of a deal. The main reason we're casting is for the damage. As far as the damage goes, it doesn't have a whole lot of scaling here. It does scale with our mastery, however, so you want to make sure you're either using this in void form or as long as you have all 3 dots up on your single target, and then that everything on its 45-second cooldown. And that's Mind Games. It's very simple, and what it does, more importantly, it's always priority target damage, right? If you want to kill a target A, it's always going to hit target A. No ifs, ands, or buts. This thing and Ascended Blast both have that in common, which is why I personally really like that. So, and really, guys, that's all I have to say about the Venthyr abilities. There's not much to talk about. It's pretty simple. Now, I will say, Soulbind-wise, I really like these Soulbinds. I don't think they're quite as good as Necrolord overall, but all 3 Soulbinds for Venthyr have something going for them in their own right. And I think, in general, if you like to multi-spec, if you like to multi-roll, or maybe try out Discipline, or maybe you want to really have a kitted out Soulbind for Mythic Plus and one for raiding, like you like to do both competitively, the Soulbinds are all very, very even with each other, so you're not exactly losing out if you want to, say, use different conduits for Mythic Plus than you would in raiding or whatever. Obviously, that's going to be pending conduit balancing and all other things, but you get a lot of flexibility with this Covenant, and it's very protected in terms of balancing, is what I'll say, right? Because, you know, they have 3 things they have to nerf to make it bad, and that's going to be hard to do, right? Very competitive overall. Is it always going to be the most damage? Not necessarily. It really depends. But more importantly, the damage is where you want to put it with Mind Games, which is good. Okay, so that is it. That's your Covenants. You get to pick with one of those 4 for the start of the expansion. Again, you can change if you want, but again, it's not going to be that crazy, right? It's 1 to 2%. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about, you know, where do you want your damage allocation? Sure, but in general, what you're talking about, the difference, it's around 2% at most. And oftentimes, if you fail a mechanic or accidentally move too much, that's like a 5% damage loss, right? So putting that into perspective. Or it's like, you know, not having your weapon enchanted versus someone that does. Is it impactful? I mean, I guess, but it's not that ridiculous. So keep that in mind. Now, that being said, a lot of people want to know what I'm going to pick. If it's not inherently obvious, I've tried not to give a very large bias. I'm obviously not picking Kyrian. That feels pretty obvious. I'm going to go Venthyr. I'm going to pick Venthyr. And I think I've listed out the reasons here, but, you know, in general, all 3 Soulbinds being good, it just makes me feel strong, like less scared about balancing, which I like. Being able to off-spec without having a whole lot of punishment is really solid. I like playing all my specs. That's good for me. And I think most importantly, Mind Games is just what it is. There's nothing gimmicky about it. You don't have to worry about using it specifically like with weird timings with like Unholy Nova. It will always hit that target. And I think having that priority target nuke from a rating perspective especially is very, very powerful. Or, you know, another great example is Mythic Plus. So in Mythic Plus affixes this week, you have, or not this week, this expansion, Season 1, you have Prideful. And if Prideful spawns during a large pack of mobs, and I really want to kill the Prideful mob, I just Mind Games it, right? I have a single target nuke spell. And I can't do that with the other Covenant abilities, especially, I mean, Kyrian you kind of can, but it's got a long cooldown, so it's going to be hard to line up. So I think all those things kind of wrapped together make me feel better about picking Venthyr than some of the other options. Am I super happy with it? No. Do I wish it was better? Absolutely. But it's what we got to deal with, and that's what I'm going to rock with starting off my journey in Shadowlands. So I'm curious to see, what are you guys going to pick? If I can find it, I thought it was kind of interesting, but someone made a straw poll in the Priest Discord saying like, hey, what Covenant are you picking on your Priest? I might link that below if you guys want to take that. I'm just kind of curious what everyone's leaning towards. Definitely feels like Necrolord is the favorite right now, but I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. What are you guys going to pick? You know, I'm kind of curious your reasons for that, but, you know, there it is. So thank you so much. I know this has been a very long video. I hope you've learned something, and I hope this is helping you making your Covenant choice going into the start of Shadowlands. All right. Again, big thank you to all the patrons that are helping me out with all the crazy amounts of videos that I've been able to put out recently. I hope you guys have enjoyed them. Would not have been possible without this amazing support. And again, guys, have fun in Shadowlands. Have fun with whatever Covenant you pick. It's going to be fine. All right. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.